What part should cinema play in the development of revolutionary struggles? Or, in other words, how should intellectuals take part in the revolution? The photograph gives a practical answer to this question, the answer of a whole people. The photograph has been taken and published, and it has been taken in a certain way to make sure that it would be published, both on the right and on the left, and this is what has happened, obviously, otherwise we would not have obtained it. Tout va bien answers this question too, but from somewhere else, and in another way. A way, in fact, of not being too quick to give this kind of answer. A way that is a means of saying, here in France, where we are, in 1972, ruled by the friends of the Americans and the Russians, everything is not so clear. Everything is not so obvious. Fidel Castro said at the UN that for revolutionaries there are never any obvious truths, that they are an invention of imperialism, and that those who are big use obvious truth cleverly to oppress those who are small.
And since everything is not obvious, Jane, let us continue asking ourselves questions. But let us make an effort to ask them differently. In other words, let us ask new questions in order to be able to give new answers. For example, let us observe how the Vietnamese expressed their struggle. Let us ask ourselves some questions, since we wish to express our struggle too. And first, let us ask ourselves honestly what makes us able to say that we are really struggling. But at this point, perhaps you, Jane, will ask us, why this photograph of me and not one of Ramsey Clark, for example? He was in Vietnam too, and he also witnessed the bombing of the dikes. Simply, Jane, because of Tout va bien, and because your social rank in the film was the same as in this photograph. You're an actress. We're all actors in this stage of history, yes. But what's more, you work in films, and so do we. Then why not Yves Montand in Chile, you could say? He was also in the movie, true. But it so happens that the Chilean revolutionaries, the Mir, did not judge that it would be a good thing to publish photographs of Yves. Whereas the Vietnamese revolutionaries did judge, with your agreement, that it would be a good thing to publish photographs of you. In fact, to publish photographs of your agreement with the Vietnamese struggle.
There is another problem too, and one that we can't avoid. We are both men who have made Tout va bien, and you are a woman. In Vietnam, the question is not put that way, but here it is. And as a woman, you undoubtedly will be hurt a little or a lot by the fact that we are going to criticize a little or a lot your way of acting in this photograph. Hurt because once again, as usual, men are finding ways to attack women. If for no other reason, we hope that you will be able to come and answer our letter by talking with us as we go reading it in 2 or 3 places in the US. In the US and in Europe, it's true that things are still or have already become that way. And we are, as you, submerged in some pretty troubled water through which this photograph can help us to see clearly. This is where we have to start from you in the US, from us in Paris, from you and us in Paris, from you in Vietnam, from us in Paris, looking at you in Vietnam, from us going to the US, and from everyone here in the theater listening to us and looking at you. We are starting from all this. It is organized in a certain way and functions in a certain way. We want to discuss it all, starting from there. To start from Tout va bien, to go to Vietnam, to come back to Tout va bien, in other words, to come back to Vietnam in the theater where Tout va bien is being shown, and afterward to go back home, and tomorrow to go back to the factory. In order to discuss all that, we are slipping this photograph under people's noses for a second look, since the Vietnamese and you already slipped it there once. In other words, we ask, and we are asking ourselves, did we really look at this photograph? What did we see in it? And beneath its question, we discover another question. For example, how did we look at this photograph? How did our eyes function in regard to this photograph? And what makes them glance that way instead of another? And still another question, what makes our voice interpret this glance in a certain way instead of another?
Tout va bien asks all of these questions. These questions can all be summed up in the big question of the role of the intellectuals in the revolutionary struggles. Or rather, this big well-known question about intellectuals, one begins to see that by expressing itself in that way, it becomes paralyzing, and that it paralyzes others. And finally, that it is no longer a question belonging to the revolution. Today's questions about the revolution, as we will discover in relation to the photograph, then in relation to the film, should be how to change the old world. And one can see right away that the old world of a Viet Cong is not the same as the old world of a Western intellectual, that the old world of a Palestinian is not the same as that of a black child from Harlem, that the old world of a worker from the Renault factory is not the same as that of his girlfriend. One can see that this photograph gives a practical answer to the question of changing the old world. And therefore, we're going to examine this photographic answer. We're going to make an investigation. We're going to look for some clues. We're going to analyze and put them together. We will try to explain the organization of these elements that make up this photograph. On the one hand, we will explain things as if we were dealing with a photographic molecular structure, and on the other hand, as if we were dealing with a kind of social nerve cell. Then, we will try to show the connection between the scientific investigation and the more political one.
Where do the right ideas come from? From the struggle for production, from the class struggle, and from scientific experimentation.
In making this investigation, questioning this photograph, we're doing nothing other than trying to find out how the answer that this photograph gives was produced in the context of the struggle in Vietnam.
Then we will see if the answer is entirely satisfactory for everyone, for whom, against whom, and if perhaps other questions won't start cropping up, just those that tout va bien somehow or other manages to raise. For example, as far as an important
part of the photograph is concerned, the actress's expression, the relation between the eyes and the mouth, in Western Europe, in our opinion, one cannot be satisfied with it for the same reasons as its authors. Those who took the photograph or decided that it should be taken, the North Vietnam Viet Cong Collective. And this, at first, seems absolutely normal, the context being different. But then, one ought to inquire as thoroughly as they do into what has conditioned this idea of what is normal.
In saying this, we are not doing as most of the Communist Party and their allies in the Western world, the Pope, the UN, the Red Cross, who say simply, let us help Vietnam toward peace. Saying what we have said, on the contrary, is saying something much more precise. For example, let us help the North Vietnamese-South Vietnam alliance make its own peace. And even more precise, since Vietnam, in changing its own world, helps us change our own, how can we really help Vietnam in return? And since the Viet Cong North Vietnam Collective is struggling, criticizing and transforming Southeast Asia, how can we struggle in our context for changing Europe and America? Of course, all this takes a little longer to say than just peace in Vietnam, and it necessitates doing things more thoroughly than just creating 2 or 3 Vietnams. And that's why Marx, in the preface to the first edition of Capital, was asking for readers who were not afraid of minute details, in order to overthrow the king of hell and free all the smaller devils. Faced with this photograph a few months ago by you, Jane, and the Vietnamese, and now by us again, each person can, if he is willing, make his own investigation. Then we will be free to compare the results, and we will be able to speak without taking the desire to speak away from those who are listening. Perhaps we will be able, just for a moment, to say a little less nonsense about ourselves and the revolution.
And one more thing, so that you won't feel attacked personally. Although we can't really avoid it, we feel the question is badly put, but we hope that by the end of this letter things will be a little clearer. And that's why we really need you to come and answer us directly, because we're writing to you not only as authors of Tout va bien, but also because we have been looking at this photograph. And you must admit, it is the first time anyone who has seen a photograph of you in a magazine writes to you about it this way. So that you won't feel like our chosen victim, as they say, and so that you'll understand that we're not aiming at Jane, but at a function of Jane.